But when it comes to protecting who I am, protecting my voice, my freedom, my confidence, all those things, you're not going to stand in my way. And that is what that spare change moment did for me, because there was a time in that season that was very dark, where I almost questioned, do I need to continue my life? Because I was a failure. I had failed at this 3 times. I'm a bad parent, setting a bad example. And that person now doesn't even exist. I look back and I'm like, girl, what was you thinking?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Spirit Change Podcast. Super excited to have April Nowlin in the room. She is a divorce recovery coach. Coach April, thank you so much for joining us today. I always start off the podcast with, what is one word to describe you and why?
Yeah, thank you so much, Angela, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So my one word, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, I have a couple different words, right? But the word that comes to mind in this season is relentless. And the reason why I chose that word is because it reminds me of strength, of being intense in our recovery, being intense in overcoming. And so relentless really, when I think about that, I think about being persistent. And the phrase that comes to mind is quitting is not an option. And so that's my word for this season is relentless, because quitting just isn't an option for me.
I love that, April. So relentless. So you are not a stranger to pivoting, right? And so when I hear the word relentless and also quitting is not an option, right? I think about just kind of reading through your story just briefly. So we'll jump right into your spirit change moment. Let's talk a little bit about what was your spirit change moment and how does that impact how you show up today?
Yes. So in 2019, on January 26th, I got 20 minutes notice that my husband was leaving our marriage. And it wasn't just that he was leaving, but he shared with me that he never wanted to be a husband. He never wanted to be a stepfather. And the primary reason we had gotten married was because he needed help paying his bills. And so that alone was devastating enough, right? Like, who wants to hear that? But the big thing was that this was going to be my 3rd divorce. So at 41 years old, I was getting divorced for the 3rd time. I know the look on your face is the look that everyone like, girl, what? 3 times? And so in that moment, I asked myself, was I going to be a victim or was I going to be a survivor? And I believe that being a victim was what led me to my 3rd divorce, because I had never learned how to be a survivor. When we are victims, or when we have a victim mentality, we are living our life from the lens of the hurt of our past and not from the lens of our life looking forward. And so I made some pivotal shifts that year. I went through a lot of therapy that dug up things from my childhood that was very painful. I went literally to a mountaintop in Sedona and had a funeral for my old life. I then wrote a book about being divorced 3 times so I could tell the world what not to do. And from there, that started me to do the work that I'm doing today. And it was more than just me wanting to have healthy relationships. But at this time, I had a 10-year-old daughter. And that I had to explain, this is why me and your stepdad are getting married. And by the way, I've been through this 3 times. Right. And so divorce is a death. And my question was, am I going to keep reliving this same death? Am I going to keep reliving the same pattern with the same outcome? Or am I going to do something different? And so I chose, and I use that word a lot with my clients, I chose to do the work to do something different.
Right. Wow. So, as you were talking, the 3-time divorce, that wasn't necessarily the shocker, I don't believe. I believe what the shocker was the 20 minutes, right? So, it like your life can be changed, at the drop of a dime. And for you, it was a 20-minute, notice that he's leaving the divorce. And when you think about just everything that we've gone through as a society and just how our entire lives just changed. The word pivot was used so much over the last couple of years, and I listened to your story and the fact that you talked a bit about how divorce in and of itself is a death, right? And so many times when we're going through these seasons of change, April, people don't really think about that, divorce being a death, something coming to an end, right? So how did you create this space to where you allowed that old self, the old ways to die, if you would, and create this new beginning from your spirit change moment?
Yeah, I think, like I said, my motivator, the difference this time was my daughter.
Mhm.
Like you said, 20 minutes, that's quick. And it was 20 minutes. And then within a week, every trace of him was gone from my home. So I would come home from work and just entire rooms of stuff would be missing. And so when I divorced the time before that, my daughter was 6 months old. And it was almost like, okay, she doesn't know what's going on.
Mhm.
But I knew that I was raising a Black woman. And in my family, we have a history of unhealthy relationships and divorce and step parents and all these things. And there's nothing negative if you come from that background, because that's what I was raised in. But my motivator was really her, to say, what example am I going to set for her? What is she going to see through this season? Am I going to, push everything under the rug and life is okay? Because as Black women, we're strong and we're tough and we wear a cape and you just get through it. Or is she going to see me cry? Is she going to see me pray? Is she going to see me get angry? Is she going to, we're going to talk about going to therapy and all these different things. So she really was my motivator. And when you think about pivot, I actually do a talk called How to Pivot on Purpose, because I am no stranger to the pivot. And so when we pivot, I think the key is, what are we going to do different this time?
Mhm.
And so my motivator really was her.
Wow, wow. And as you talked, April, and you talked about your daughter, I think about, and you talked about your family history, right?
Mhm.
So you think about generational, um, essentially generational, your child is learning from generations before her, right? You're learning from the people that
Mhm.
came before you. And so many times when we are dealing with trauma, because that's ultimately what it is,
Yes.
unhealed trauma,
Mhm.
issues that we haven't necessarily addressed in the past. Do
Mhm.
you mind sharing with me, or even the audience, really, how did you help yourself heal through this trauma? But now, how did you, recognizing that your 10-year-old daughter is looking at you, how do you help her heal through this trauma as well?
Absolutely. So when I went to therapy in 2019, the first question my therapist asked was, tell me about your childhood.
Mhm.
And I said, this has nothing to do with my childhood. I want to talk about my ex-husband. And she was like, well, tell me about your childhood. And in talking to her about being molested as a young child, being raised by an addict and what that does to you, what I realized was that each and every experience that I had had contributed to the type of men that I dated, the type of behavior that I allowed to happen in my life. I was talking to my mom after therapy, and I told her, I said, I never wanted to be married. And she's like, what? I said, I never wanted to be someone's wife. What I wanted was to not be rejected. And my biological mother was an addict. And so growing up in that environment, I always felt like you chose addiction over me. And she eventually passed away when I was 23 of a cocaine overdose. And so carrying that feeling of rejection, I thought, well, these men aren't rejecting me. And so, oh, the next, Christian good thing to do is you get married,
Mhm.
but realize married. And so your childhood plays such a big role in the decisions that you make, and that trauma plays out in the decisions that you make. And
Mhm.
so on this, I call it the healing journey. And I'm a Christian. So, God gave me this image, and I live in imagery, but he gave me this image of a forest. And what he showed me was that each time we have an experience in life, a new tree is planted. So, good, bad, or indifferent. And so when negative things, when traumas happen, those trees start to die. The problem is that we don't remove the tree. And so if anyone knows anything about trees' roots, they grow deep and wide and they affect every other tree around them. And so for me, that tree of intimate relationships with men was dead. And each time I would go through a divorce, I would maybe cut off a branch, cut it down a little bit. But what I realized was the root was there. And so that was really my kind of moving on from my trauma was healing, was pulling up the roots. And let me tell y'all, it was hard. It was hard. Having to relive some of those things, it was hard. Now, you asked me about my daughter. So one of the things that I did to help her through the trauma of that divorce, because once again, it's a death. So she's living this death with me, is that I was transparent. I didn't sugarcoat what divorce was. And even though she was 6 months old with me and when me and her dad divorced, and he and I have a good relationship. So this was the first time she had gone through that trauma. And so I allowed her to express herself as a 10-year-old. One of the things that she told me that broke my heart, she looked me in my face and she said, "Mommy, I don't want you to die alone." She was 10 years old. And so I allowed her to talk through her feelings so she could tell me whatever she wanted. She could tell me how she felt about me, about the relationship ending. And so that was how I began to help her through it. Because one of the things I think that we do as a Black and Brown society is we're taught to stuff it in, right? You don't cry, you don't show your emotions. And so I let her know it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be scared that mommy's going to die alone. Let's talk about this. And so that's how I tried to help her.
Wow. Wow. April, oh my goodness, there's so much to unpack, right? So first of all, I want to just back up just a little bit because you talked about the fact that you didn't necessarily want to be married, but your fear of rejection kind of led you down that way as well as your faith, right?
Yeah.
And so, can you share a little bit about, how did you even get to this point of the fact that, how did you correlate the two? The rejection led to the marriage because then you didn't want to be alone.
Yeah. And obviously these are things that I've learned in the last 3 years, because this was the first time I really wanted to heal and did the work to heal. And so as I was thinking about, a lot of it was the relationships I saw as a child. And so once again, having a mother who lived as an addict. And so I saw the way men would abuse her physically, mentally, emotionally, and things like that. I did grow up with my father and my stepmom, who I call mom to this day, and we live right around the corner from each other. But they've been married for 44 years. I'm 45, 44 years. But in the beginning, their marriage wasn't healthy. And so in all of this, being that kid that was kind of shift from home to home, it was that constant feeling of, you don't love me, you don't want me. And so when I would meet a man who says, "Oh, well, I love you," and him not even knowing what love is, right? But "I love you," the next logical thing is, well, we should get married. And so it was more of the feeling of, even though this man isn't the greatest, I've never been physically abused, but there was some emotional abuse that happened. Even though this man isn't the greatest, I may not get another. He might be the only one. And so even though I, knowing now that a wife to this person was not what I was looking for, I was just looking for the security of marriage, right? If you get married, you won't leave me. My mom left me, growing up with the parents that I had, I got shifted around a lot between my parents, my grandparents, my aunt. So I constantly felt like someone was giving me away. And so being married means you can't leave me because we're married. Well, we know that's not true.
Right.
And so each time I had this renewed sense of security in what I thought marriage would bring. And what it was deep on the inside, I had my own issues that I hadn't dealt with.
Right, right. You think about it, and I'm even thinking about my own story, April. So you think about just childhood abuse, childhood neglect, and how that shows up in our adulthood. And if we're not careful, if we don't unpack it, and call it what it is, then it continues that cycle. And what I hear you say is that, at that last point in your life when you realize that you had to do things differently, that's when you really sought help. That's when you really got to the root of your life, right?
Mhm.
What is driving you? And so many times, my daughter and I talk about this often, but so many times it's our subconscious that's driving our ability to move forward or not to move forward, right? We get stuck in these situations and these circumstances, and we continue to repeat that cycle. So just to hear you saying that, hey, I'm going to stop this cycle, not only for myself, but I'm also going to give my daughter an opportunity to discuss how this has impacted her. Like, you are literally shifting the outcome potentially for your daughter's life as well. Hopefully she's learning from your past, right?
Yeah.
So, when you think about really your spirit change moment, what was one of the biggest lessons that you learned or lessons that you learned over
Mhm.
that time?
When you just said something, as children, when we're in these abusive relation or abusive situations, one of the things that, and I would say, I'm not sure about your age, but my generation, generations before, was you were not taught that you had a voice.
That part.
And for me, I'm a talker by nature, which is great because now I make money talking to people, but I'm a talker by nature. And so a lot of times growing up, I heard things like, you talk too much, stop talking so much, don't talk. And so when I was going through things like abuse, the sexual abuse from a family member, and going through things with my mother, I was never felt safe to use my voice. And so when I would get into these relationships, there were times where I could hear myself screaming, get out of this. But I was told to not talk. And so I wouldn't use my voice and tell this man, you're not good enough for me. I don't want to be in this, until it was too late, until I was divorced and now I'm fed up and now I'm leaving. Right. And so in that moment, that year of 2019, I believe I found and learned how to use my voice, which is why, as a Christian, and I say that for a reason, it's easy for me to talk about being married 3 times. And I don't carry the shame and the guilt that unfortunately the church and religion tries to put on you when you go through that, because I learned to find my voice and I knew I had a voice and that my voice mattered. And so for me, that was the biggest lesson. And so when I talk to my daughter, I always tell my daughter, you can tell me anything. And I mean anything without judgment. Now, does that mean you're not going to get in trouble? Absolutely not. But there won't be judgment. I don't care how embarrassed you are. You can tell me anything. And I wish that I had that freedom. There were 2 of my marriages specifically walking down the aisle. I heard a voice say, don't do this. But I was too scared of what other people were going to think. I was too scared of, well, we spent this money and blah, 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 to speak up. And so that's what I got in that season, was I got my voice back.
Wow, April, and when I think about a lot of the women that I support, I also think about that as well. So many times we lose our voice, and I know me myself personally being abused as a young person, raped as a young adult, and then trying to figure out what is life, right? Especially to your point, when we were younger, we were told kids are supposed to be seen and not heard.
Absolutely.
Asked you, so all of those things teach us that we can't use our voice. And so as an adult woman, where, we are used to being quiet, here we are now trying to figure out what is our power, what is our strength, how do I share with people that I'm abused without that guilt and that shame. And it took me a minute to get to that point to where I was willing to open up and say, hey, yeah, I was molested as a kid, or I was raped. One thing that I did want to say, especially if there's a woman out there that's listening, you write your own narrative.
Yeah.
And so many times in life, we allow other people to tell the narrative of our stories, right? And so it's important for you to reclaim your voice, find and use it to not only help yourself through your situation, but to also help other people that are even coming behind you that might be in that abusive relationship. Because you staying quiet isn't helping anyone at all. And most importantly, it's not helping you.
No.
So you think about your daughter in and of herself, April. How has this helped her? How have you seen a shift in her, if you don't mind me asking?
She I don't think took it as hard as
Mhm,
people thought when my ex-husband left. They were never very close.
mhm,
She was more concerned about me than our marriage failing, right? So even though we were married, I was still very much a single parent, and I had been a single parent for 8 years before he and I married. So not a whole lot of the day-to-day in our home really changed. She was more concerned with my health. And I remember one time, so he left in January, or he actually moved out February 1st. And for that next month, I kid you not, I lived off of ice cream. Like pints of ice cream, y'all. Let me tell you, like 2 or 3 pints a week, like no shame. And my daughter walked into the kitchen one night and she just looked me dead in my face and she says, "You need to stop eating so much ice cream." And I was like, facts. This is true. This is true. And so, I don't think she felt the blow of the divorce. It was more of, is my mommy okay?
mhm,
And how can I help her be okay? And then also, she's an only child. And so I think only children have just this level of maturity that's a little bit different when you have siblings. And so she would try to step up to the plate. So I would see things like, she'll check the doors. Are they locked before you go to bed?
mhm.
And so I think that's really with her. It wasn't so much a divorce itself. She took on, I think, kind of a new responsibility for me, which can be very dangerous. And so one of my goals was to make sure that I was not putting my grief on her, and I was not allowing her to take on my grief. And so there were times that I didn't necessarily cry in front of her or things like that, because I wanted to make sure that she only got what she could handle. And so, but once again, that door was open for her to be able to talk. And like you were saying, as we were, when we were children, it was be seen and not heard. And so one of the things that I've always allowed my child to do, and I've had friends that are like, "Girl, please," is I will tell her, "You can always tell me when you don't want to do something. Now, you have to give me a reason. So you can't just be like, I don't want to do this. And that doesn't mean you're going to get the outcome, but you can tell me." And the reason why I do that is because I remember my dad, him wanting me to sit on his lap when I was probably 10 or so. And I fought it, and he could not figure out. He's like, what is wrong with you? Well, what was wrong with me is my uncle has been molesting me, and I don't want to sit on a man's lap. But I could not tell him that. And so even a good example is my daughter is a tomboy. So she's 14, she's finally wearing dresses. But when she was like 5 or 6, she would not wear a dress. We would fight. And she'd be like, "I don't want to do this." And I'm like, "Why?" She goes, "Well, I can't play like I want to play in a dress. I can't climb on stuff. And I was like, you know what? Valid answer. Don't have to wear a dress. But I always want her to be comfortable telling me why she doesn't want to do something, because I want her to be able to say, "I don't feel comfortable at this friend's house," or "I don't feel comfortable, going out with this relative," if there's a situation or something that she's feeling.
Yeah, I love that. And when you think about it, April, it I, as you were talking about it, I just heard you say that you because of the things that you went through, because of all of the trials, because of the abuse that you went through, you wanted to break that with your daughter. So you wanted to have that open line of communication with her. And I love that fact that you talked about reasoning, because I think that so many times, and the only reason why I say this is because I look back over my daughter's childhood. Many times, oftentimes we had a transactional relationship. How was your day? Fine, good. But to ask for those reasons, it gives your child the ability to open up and really talk about what's
Mhm.
really going on in her mind.
Yeah.
She's no longer, she doesn't have to bottle, she doesn't have to stuff.
Yeah.
I love that aspect of your relationship with your daughter. So when you think about your spirit change moment and you think about where you are today, how do you believe your spirit change moment really impact how you show up from a professional perspective, even from a personal perspective as well?
My spare change moment made me the person that you're looking at today. Because of me being able to use my voice, I got a renewed sense of confidence. Had I had the opportunity to do something like this 4 years ago, I would have cowered down. I would not have showed up. I probably wouldn't have showed up looking like this either. So it really has opened up the door for me to flourish, to be who I truly believe God has called me to be. A lot of times I think that we have a purpose and a calling, whether that's, universe or God or whatever, however, you see it, who's ever listening to this. But because of those traumas, because of the things that we're not healed for, it's almost like they're hidden under a pile of leaves. So we could be a diamond and there's this big old pile of leaves on top and no one knows that diamond is under there. And so that's what my spare change moment did for me, is it allowed me to be April. It allowed me to be the April that I knew was always in the inside, but was too afraid to let out. So my friends will tell you, April will say what she want to say. She gonna be straightforward. She's not gonna sugarcoat. Now I'm respectful. I care about people's feelings and all those things. But when it comes to protecting who I am, protecting my voice, my freedom, my confidence, all those things, you're not gonna stand in my way. And that is what that spare change moment did for me, because there was a time in that season that was very dark, where I almost questioned, do I need to continue my life? Because I was a failure. I had failed at this 3 times. I'm a bad parent, setting a bad example. And that person now doesn't even exist. I look back and I'm like, girl, what was you thinking?
How did you get to that point though, April? For you, because you think, because I just think about just how much society has taught us who, and I use air quotes,
Yeah.
who we're supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And if we are divorced several times, then we're failing. If we're X, then we're not good. So for that woman that might be listening, that, to your illustration, maybe she's covered by a whole bunch of leaves, right? And she's trying to claw her way out. Like, what would you say to her right now?
Yeah, so there's 3 steps that I share with my clients, I share with anyone. And it was the premise of the book. So I wrote a book called Move the Finish Line, the year of my divorce. And really the premise of that is, I believe that God, universe, or whatever, has a finish line for certain areas in our life. And that finish line is inherently good and positive. Because of things that have happened in our life, we move that finish line. So I feel like God wants me to have a healthy, intimate relationship. And I am currently interviewing for a forever bae. But because of the decisions that my parents made and the decisions that I made, I moved that finish line. And I had a choice of saying, I'll never be in a healthy relationship, or I'm going to follow the original finish line. So for that woman who says, look, girl, I'm buried, that tree is still there, what am I supposed to do? So I believe there's 3 things that we need to do. The first one is we need to face the facts. And the facts in my life was that I had chosen these relationships and something was broken and it needed to be fixed. That wasn't an easy fact to face. And I can say that the 3 men that I married were not the best men. My daughter's father, we are really good friends now. He's matured. My last husband, he can go play in traffic, but I still, wish him the best. And so, yes, they were at fault, but I had a part to play. And so facing the facts is the first thing. You have got to own up to the decisions that you've made, and not own up in the sense of like, well, because my mama was this way and my daddy, and that's a contributing factor. But at the end of the day, we make our choices. And so that was number 1. I had to face the facts that I had a bad picker. I was picking bad. The second thing that I believe we need to do is to ask for help. Okay. So once again, Black women, got my cape on, girl, take that cape off, take it off, put it down. And so that is where I went to therapy. I went to counseling. I read books. I asked my friend circle. I mean, y'all tell me, and some of them told me, girl, in that last relationship, you was terrible. Like, you saw the signs. And so asking for help is professional help and personal help. So personal help are things like if you've got a good family support, your parents, your siblings, if you got friends and all those things. Professional help is you might have to invest some money in your healing. So this may be therapy, counseling, and all those things. And let me say this, your pastor ain't your therapist and your mom ain't your therapist. And
Mm.
so you need to know the difference, okay? But get yourself some help. And then the last thing, and this is where I think we get stuck so much, is you have to do the work. You have to do the work. So once I realized, okay, this is why I was making these decisions, I had choices to make. Was I still going to date the same type of men? How did I look at myself? And I mean, I had to do affirmations and prayer and, have friends be like, girl, you thinking wrong today. I mean, all these things, and some of these things are still in place. When I date today, I have a list that I go through. Why am I dating this person? Is it an insecurity in me? What am I seeing in him? Can I walk away? Literally, I have a written list that I go through to make sure I don't end up back in that situation. But we have to do the work. And sometimes that work is dirty. The story that I like to tell, for those of you who are maybe of a certain faith, is there's a story where a man wanted to be healed in the Bible. So he went to, I think it was Elijah, and he's like, I want you to heal me. And the guy thought that he was just going to snap his fingers and be healed. And he said, all right, well, you can be healed, but you got to go bathe 7 times in this dirty river. And he was like, what? Oh, no. How dare you ask me to bathe in this river? But sometimes we have to get dirty with ourselves, with our friends and family. I had to go back and apologize to people. One of my ex-husbands, I apologized to him for some things that I had done. And he told me it was actually my daughter's dad. And he said, April, he said, I've been waiting at that time. I think it was 10 years. He said, I've been waiting 10 years to hear your apology.
Wow.
Now he hadn't held it against me. Thank God.
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, it didn't affect us raising our daughter together. But that was doing the dirty work. And so once again, the 3 things I believe we need to do is we need to face the facts. So we got to be honest with ourselves. We have to ask for the right help, and we have to do the work.
Well, April, and what I heard you say a couple of times, and I just want to highlight this for those who are listening, it is a choice. You have a choice of how you show up. You have a choice of how you respond, and you have a choice on whether or not you do the work.
Yeah.
And as you know, and as I was listening to your story, it is super critical to do that internal work first and foremost. But then also, I love the fact that you were bold enough, if you would, to go back and even apologize for your role. Because I think that oftentimes, and you talked a little bit about that victim mentality on the front end, so many times when we go through these different seasons of change, especially if there's this spot where we continue to get a divorce, we blame everybody else, for our problem. Divorce is the name of your change, right? But it could be drugs, it could be abuse, it could be whatever the case might be. You being the listener, you feel in your season of change. But the reflection is, are you owning up to the mistakes that you're making within that relationship, within that season? And I think that's important and critical, because so often we're taught to deflect and not take ownership. And as long as we continue to deflect, we'll see our growth will be so much slower. We have to take ownership, for what it is that we're doing in this season, for the choices that we're making. And I love the way that you broke it down. So April, is there anything else that you would like to share as we're transitioning out? Anything that you would like to share to that person that might be listening? He or she is on the cusp of, something great, something new, right? And they just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. So there's a bracelet. I usually have it on, but one of my good friends, when I turned 40, she bought me a bracelet and it says, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I wear it almost every day. And it just reminds me that I have the time that I need to get to where I need to go. And I have the time that I need to do the work that I need to do to get to where I need to go. And so sometimes when we're running our race in life, we get almost to that finish line and we want to putter out I ran track in middle school. And so I just remember, being trained that when you get that finish line in sight, when you get so far away, that's when you give it your all. That's when you push. It's not at the beginning of the race, right? So you have to pace yourself. So it's when you get to that finish line, that's when you sprint to the end. And so for those of you who may be listening, whether it's in business, finances, health, relationship, whatever it may be for you, and you're telling yourself, like, I feel like I'm this close, but I want to give up. Just remember, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You've got the time, to do what you need to do.
Right. I love it, April. So everyone, you've heard it here on the Spirit Change podcast, right? So keep in mind that you are to be relentless, right?
Yes.
Everything that you're supposed to do, keep pushing through it. You are almost at that finish line. So until you cross that finish line, you have a way to do things differently. Do the internal work, face the facts, understand where you are, and understand where you need to apologize in some cases, right? Don't forget to ask for help and do the work. Thank you so much, April, for being part of the Spirit Change podcast.
Thank you, Angela. It's an honor. Yeah, I really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you tuning in to this episode of Spirit Change. Be sure to stay connected for future episodes. You can follow me on social media or visit my website at angelargarman.com. Talk to you soon.